Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hello and welcome to the Sound Bites podcast. Today's episode is about plant-based recipes to nourish your body, mind, and soul. My guest today is Terry Walters. She is a self-taught plant-based chef and author of 4 best-selling and award-winning cookbooks and a James Beard Foundation Award finalist. Welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk with you today. I first learned about you and was introduced to you virtually through our mutual friend, Kurt McKenzie, who actually did the design for your new book, Nourish, that we'll be talking about today. And he also gave me a copy of the book. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
But before we dive into your new book and all things plant-based cooking, I would love for you to share a little bit more about your background, the work that you do, maybe how you got interested in cooking and how it became such a big part of your life, and also share a little bit about your previous cookbooks.
Sure. Well, it was really quite by chance. I was in college and my father had a heart attack and my mother said, go have your cholesterol tested. And when I went, I'll never forget, they actually turned me away. They said, you're in what they considered a quote unquote non-risk category. He said, you're young, you're female, and you're an athlete. And I went home, I told my mom, and she said, go back. And I did, and they took my blood and tested my cholesterol, and none of us could believe that it was really through the roof. And I was active, I was leading a healthy lifestyle. It took all of us by surprise. And I knew right then and there that at the ripe old age of 20, I did not want to go on any drugs. So I moved off campus, and I got myself an apartment with a kitchen and started teaching myself how to cook. And from day one, I thought, if kale and brown rice and these vegetables are quote unquote real food, then I have to figure out how to make them taste delicious. And, one thing led to another. And honestly, I started feeling great when my children were born. They had some health issues and I started treating them and myself with diet. And it became a passion, but it was always on the side. And I'll never forget moving back to Connecticut from the Chicago area and reconnecting with friends. And they kind of all looked at me like, what is she eating? What is that she's doing? And honestly, probably 90% of them thought that I was crazy. And the other 10% said, will you show us where that is, where that quinoa is in the grocery store? And then you take us back to your house and show us how to cook it. And 23 years later, and I don't even know how many hundreds of cooking classes later, it became more than my side passion. It really became everything that I'm about, and making those conscious choices and empowering others to do the same. And I do that through classes, through health coaching, through my books. And what a journey it's been. And thank goodness, because constantly talking about it and constantly having this at the forefront of my mind keeps me on my path. And I need it. It's not easy to make the healthy choices, and especially when the environment's always changing, our bodies are always changing. So I think of it as being quite a blessing.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your story. Yeah, that's life-changing for sure. And not many people I talk to who are really into food and so culinary are self-taught. Usually there's a relative or some influence in their life. So that's very interesting. Now, you talk about knowledge, denial, and judgment. So I want you to share this with our listeners because I think, you and I kind of connected on the whole guilt-free approach, and we're going to talk more about your food approach. You have a clean food approach and want to know what that means to you and so on. But I think talking about this knowledge, denial, and judgment is a good place for us to start.
Yeah. Well, knowledge, I think, is everything. And I think what's important about knowledge is understanding that it's going to be different for each person, right? Part of that knowledge is knowing your own body, your own resources, your environment, your belief system, right? And the other part of it is understanding the food system that we're working in. And so what does my body need and what are my options, and the time that I have to serve myself and make this. And so I think knowledge ultimately is what empowers us to make good choices or to make choices, right? Because sometimes we make choices that don't serve our best nutrition, but they serve something else. And I feel like there should be a place for that too. And hopefully that, we have the flexibility with our health to afford that. So to me, the more knowledge you have, the better choice you can make. Where judgment comes in is in that, oh no, I can't eat these salt and pepper potato chips, right? Because they're processed, right? And I'm not eating processed food. And I like to just think that, well, especially as women, we don't need more ways to judge ourselves, but judgment, it interrupts our ability to make good choices. If I were to say this category of food over here, it constitutes, breakfast food. And so in that breakfast food, I should have cereal or carbohydrate or, French toast or a bagel. Well, that is not necessarily the best fuel for me to fuel my day ahead. Whereas last night's dinner leftovers that come in a rainbow of color and have all the tastes and have protein and complex carbs and my greens, that might be the best fuel for the day ahead. So that judgment of what breakfast foods are isn't really serving me or my ability to make a good choice. And I also think that, it's hard to make good choices. It's hard to eat well. And I don't have the expectation on myself that I'm going to be 100% all the time. But in the same vein, I don't want to be beating myself up when I make choices. Or if I go out to eat and I want to get something that's, a splurge, like a splurge serves me. And so I think, we judge ourselves, we judge the food system. I see in my health coaching practice, so many people who come to me because they have all the knowledge, they're trying not to judge, and they basically have paralysis by analysis. What else can I eat? And so I just don't think that sometimes that judgment serves us, nor does denial. When I deprive myself of something that I love, I want it twice as much. And so I try and not deny myself. If it's something that is a splurge, I try and have less of it. Or maybe I just focus on bringing in the good foods so that those foods that don't serve me quite as well move to a healthier place in the mix. And sometimes they fall to the side completely, but I focus on bringing in and not denying myself.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm all for informed choices. That's where the knowledge comes in. And we know that restriction and deprivation does not work. And I love talking about adding nutrient-rich foods to our day. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned your health coaching, and I was going to ask you about this a little bit later, but I think I'll just move that up in the conversation. What kind of education or certification did you receive? And how would you say that this might be different from what someone would get by sitting down, say, with a registered dietitian?
Actually, someone might sit down with a registered dietitian or a naturopath or a physician before they come to me. And so, as you mentioned earlier at the top of the podcast, I'm totally self-taught. And what my coaching is doing is walking beside somebody, helping them make the transition. They might come to me saying, I can't eat this. I'm not supposed to have this right now. What is left and how do I prepare it? And what I try and do in my coaching, as well as in my books, is give the information so that what they can have, they're preparing well. So like the difference it makes between cooking your brown rice or quinoa or legumes on the stovetop versus in a rice cooker versus in a pressure cooker, and how the pressure cooker, for instance, neutralizes and almost gets rid of the lectins completely because of the high heat. If we soak, we can get rid of phytic acid. And so I'm trying to really support their journey and make it doable, make it delicious. So again, that they're not feeling deprived, so that they're feeling empowered, and most importantly, so that they're able to eat a diet that's not only healthy for their unique constitution, but so that they're satiated when they do that and really satisfied with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the pressure cooker saves time too, so.
And it does.
Yeah, and you mentioned people coming to you and saying, I can't eat this or I can't eat that. Sometimes they've gotten maybe oversimplified advice from a quick visit with their physician or misunderstood some recommendations. So I can appreciate being able to dig into that a little deeper.
And sometimes actually there's one group that I see a lot of, and it tends to be nurses. And I always think that's so interesting because I often wish that when they came in and sat with me that I had a mirror, because they come in and they tell me everything that well, I know I shouldn't have this or this or this. And I only have 1 cup of coffee or and they're actually telling me they already know what they need. And so to me, my job isn't to make that determination. It is to help guide them to find those answers, but also to empower them to be able to live that lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something you said earlier about listening to ourselves. I talk about that a little bit on the podcast here and there, but I think it's really important that we learn how to listen to our own intuition.
Important. And boy, is it hard because sometimes we hear and sometimes our body is telling us, no, this isn't a need. This is a craving or this is an addiction, right? Like we don't know. Am I craving salt because I need to have more salt? Am I craving salt because my adrenals are spent? Like it's pretty hard to listen to the body.
Yeah.
It likes to trick us sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you use this term, the clean food approach, and all 3 of your previous books have clean in the title. And the new book is called Nourish, Plant-Based Recipes to Feed Body, Mind, and Soul. So I'd like to hear from you, what does clean mean to you? And maybe how you've sort of transitioned to Nourish. When was your first book published?
My first book, Clean Food, came out in 2007.
Okay.
I remember when I titled it Clean Food, people thought I was crazy. What does that mean? I already wash my food, And for me, it always and still does means minimally processed for maximum nutrition. And I think of these foods, my books, they're all plant-based, they're all gluten-free. I don't think of them yet as a diet.
Mm-hmm.
I think of them as the foods we all need more of, and kind of what else is on your plate is up to you. And I don't feel like it's my place to determine that or judge it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what clean has always been. It's always been a rainbow of color. It's always been the 5 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent. And in more recent years, I've added like the need for superfoods to that. But superfoods to me are not like, those expensive bags of whatever, fill in the blank, maca powder or chia or hemp. I mean, you could put those in the superfood category as well. But to me, a superfood is whatever color and taste you're not getting. For one person, it could be blueberries. It could be greens. It could be leeks. There's some garlic. So whatever your unique superfoods are, and then fermented foods for gut health, those living probiotic-rich foods that support every system in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, the concept of clean hasn't changed as far as how I've defined it, but the slow move towards nourish is just, 2 things. One, I felt just like clean got taken and used by so many different people that it started losing its meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like the more I continued on my own journey, that clean didn't acknowledge that it is a lifestyle choice and there's lifestyle with it, and that healthy food doesn't just keep us, God willing, healthy. It actually feeds us emotionally. It dictates our mental state, our mood, our behavior, our immune support. And so I felt like Nourish encompassed that more holistic approach and the power of food in that.
Okay, beautiful. You mentioned fermentation. There's an entire section in your book on fermentation that we're going to talk about. It's very interesting. And of course, gut health is all the rage. It's a long time coming. In dietitian school, we learn if you don't have a healthy gut, you don't have health. So it all starts there. But I want you to first share, you have a little black dress theory. So I want you to talk about that.
I love my little black dress theory. Thank you. Yeah, I think of diet like the little black dress, in that you wear a little black dress and I don't own one. So I'm going to ask you to borrow it. And when I do, I'm going to put it on and I'm going to I'm really short. I'm going to need to take it up here and maybe let it out there. And so we can wear the same black dress with little tweaks. And that's my approach to diet and nutrition as well. It does serve all of us to fill our plate with as much fresh produce, vegetables as possible. But one person might, have animal protein, where the other one might do better with, legumes and nuts and seeds. Or you might not like kale and I love it, or vice versa, right? So people always say to me, do I have to eat kale? Like I hear that so many times. I don't know why clean food brings that out in people, but I'm like, no, you don't have to eat kale. There are so many different greens. And that's the thing. Like I remember when I was growing up, like the plate had the protein, the starch, a salad, right? And then another vegetable, as if salad and vegetables were different things, but regardless. And there's so many categories of vegetables. So when we say, you want your plate to have however many servings of vegetables, I like to really break it down in my books. Like, okay, there's root vegetables, there's cruciferous vegetables, there's, our allium. Like there's so many different categories right in that one greater category of vegetable. And we're all served to dive deeply into that area.
I love that. Everybody's unique and they have different preferences and different needs. So you mentioned your cooking classes. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And in particular, what you find that your students or your clients are maybe most confused about or most curious about when it comes to cooking, and especially plant-based cooking and eating.
Well, I'd like to tell you that my cooking classes are all about the culinary, but I really think of the food as what brings us together to have the conversation about the health. And early on when I started teaching, I found that people would come and say, I was so inspired by your class that I went home and I got rid of everything in my pantry and I switched over to this. And I don't really ever recommend that. I actually think if you picked one recipe from my book a week and just tried it, you would probably have to buy one or two ingredients you've never bought before in the beginning. And then after a few weeks, you would start using the same ingredients over and over. And at the end of the year, your pantry would have transitioned more slowly and more sustainably. And your diet, if you liked only half of the recipes you made, you'd have 26 new foods in your diet. And so when we talked earlier about, not depriving ourselves, we're thinking about bringing in, that actually is a lot of nutrition that you'd be bringing into your diet. 26 new recipes, you could live on that alone. Yeah, so I like to think of it as a little bit of a slower, more sustainable transition. The classes, whenever you're talking about food, everybody comes from a different place and a different level of understanding, and they bring different traditions from their own backgrounds. And so even though I'm teaching the class, I like to facilitate the conversation because I find that there's so much wisdom in the room, whether it's personally in the room or virtually on the screen. And everybody has such wonderful experience that I like to make sure there's the opportunity for all of that to come to the table. I've been teaching for 23 years. So we do hands-on workshops like fermentation and sourdough bread, and we do cooking classes that are always in season. In the beginning, I got so tired of people asking me what I was going to make that I used to say, this is a cooking class and you can come or not. And I'm not telling you the menu until you get here. And I did that for about 10 years, and classes filled. It's going to be seasonal. The topic's going to be, appropriate to the season. The food's going to be locally grown. The cooking methods are going to be about how we prepare the food to maintain balance with our environment in that season. So yeah, it was really fun. And to some degree, I still do that today, but I give a little more information now.
Yes, and I had the opportunity to make a couple of your recipes, and several things that you just mentioned is definitely true. I want to thank you for introducing me to some new flavors and ingredients. I made the roasted broccoli 2 ways. So it's basically, roasted broccoli, but then you have 2 different flavorings that you could use, the shallot miso or a tahini gomasayo. Am I saying that right?
Gomasio.
Gomasio. Okay. Yes, I preferred the shallot miso, but I would definitely make those again. I also made the basmati rice with wild mushrooms, kale, and thyme. And I really liked that. My whole family liked that. I would definitely make that again. But as you know, Terry, I emailed you in the process saying, I can't find these 4 or 5 ingredients. And I think the problem is my Whole Foods is a little on the small side. But I also talked with Kurt, our friend Kurt, about this, and he was like, "Oh, kombu, is that how you say it? Kombu?
Kombu, yeah.
And the ume plum vinegar." He's like, "You'll definitely use those in other recipes. You'll use those again." So to your point, I think that the hardest part of your recipes was finding the ingredients, but I was able to make some substitutions based on Google and your advice. And I just appreciate learning something new. I kind of stretched my skills a little bit. And my regular listeners know I'm not the most culinary person, but I have come a long way over the course of the podcast with my Do More with Dinner initiative. I have to do an update on like how it started, how it's going. But yeah, I have tried a lot of new recipes, and then some of those have become like regular weekly dishes that I prepare for my family. But when we were talking before, you referred to yourself as sort of a dump and stir
I was going to say, you're making it sound so hard.
No, but it's true. Like the techniques and everything to prepare it were simple.
Yeah.
Very doable for me. So
yeah,
talk to us about the dump and stir approach.
Well, I want to talk about a few things because you touched on them. But absolutely, I did not go to culinary school. And as a matter of fact, when I'm making recipes, if I look around the kitchen and I'm partway through and there are too many pots and pans out, I scratch the whole thing. Because as much as I like the recipe to be easy, I like the cleanup to be easy too. And so,
Amen.
I'm all about one effort and here's your meal. And so, yeah, there's nothing contrived in the book. Even the section on fermentation, like I tried to really spell it out. So it's super, super easy because I know it's a little intimidating. And so I think part of my job is taking away the intimidation factor, and two, making sure that it's going to be successful no matter what. But the other thing is that you mentioned like these ingredients like kombu and umi plum vinegar, which most people haven't heard of. And I swear like that has been a really wonderful outcome of the pandemic because people are used to going to their grocery store and not finding the most basic things that they could always depend on because of, supply chain.
Right.
And so they're used to going online. And as a result, it's really not that big a deal to go online and buy a bag of kombu, even though it's even at my local, we have Stop and Shop here. But in the front of this book, I really slaved over the section of my favorite ingredients and tools and why. And not only mentioning that kombu is a seaweed, but what kombu is in the recipe, how it tenderizes legumes, how it reduces gaseousness, how it increases minerals when we cook our legumes and our grains so that they're less, even though they're complex carbohydrates, they're less acid forming and more alkaline. And it is not expensive, and it's available at almost any natural food store. And umi plum vinegar, that's just like crack. It's like, well aware that when I say the tastes are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, that most people disagree with me. Most people think that umami is one of the tastes, and I don't. I think umami is when you have the perfect combination and all the tastes in balance, and that gives something umami. And umi plum vinegar, it has umami. It's one of those ingredients. It has sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent all right there. It's a fermented vinegar so that it's, a little bit of a digestive aid as well.
I was going to ask you about umami when you had said pungent. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, well, pungent is, it could be heat, but it's movement. It is circulation. And so, it could be hot peppers, or it could be cinnamon, or one of my favorite pungent herbs is cumin. So I think of that as the fifth taste and umami as that like perfect combination. And when the tastes aren't necessarily equally represented, they're just perfectly in balance.
Interesting. Well, you started telling a little bit about what's in your book, and that was my next question. There's 200 recipes, plant-based, but really vegan and gluten-free. What else can people find in the book? And also, you decided to self-publish this one, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that decision.
Well, yes, they'll find 200 vegan and gluten-free recipes. And while they're vegan, they might find a recommendation to make something and serve it with a piece of grilled fish or a piece of something else off the grill. So there are options on how to make it fit into any menu. They're all organized by season. They'll find my own poetry between the seasons as well. And in the back of the book, they'll find an index that is I think it might be almost 20 pages. Like it is a long index. Kurt does not like me when I say, okay, we're ready to design the index. It is a labor of love, but it's so important to me because I want people to be able to go to a farmer's market or get their CSA share or wherever they get their produce, or just look in the produce drawer to see what's left and say, okay, this is what I have and what can I make with it? And I often recommend to people, just start from the back of the book in the index. And, you go to the carrots and here are the 15 recipes that have carrots in them. And now I can see what exactly am I going to make from there.
Exactly. That really helps with food waste.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of food waste, there in the front of the book, there's a recipe for scrap stock. So you can take all the trimmings and learn how to make your own stock, which I think is just the best because you've already paid for that. And now you're not buying stock and you're making the best stock that you can. And it's really easy. There's, as I mentioned, a section on ingredients that is quite in depth about the ingredients and the health benefits of the different ingredients. So you might come across a use of arrowroot as a thickener and say, well, I don't know what arrowroot is. So you go to the front and you read about it and you'll see, oh, this is an alternative to cornstarch. So I can use my cornstarch, but here are the health benefits of arrowroot. And when I run out of cornstarch, I think I'll buy arrowroot next time, right? So really helping people make that transition, and some information on the lifestyle and, as we already mentioned, knowledge and suspending judgment and not depriving ourselves. And of course, the whole section on fermentation. I love that section on fermentation. And the reason I put it in the front is because to me, it's the foundation upon which everything else unfolds. We should have fermented foods in every season and every day. I talk in that section not only about the value of probiotics, but I think something that's often overlooked, which is what are prebiotics? Because, to have that good gut bacteria is one thing, but we have to feed it as well. And that comes in with the prebiotics, whether it's garlic or onion or bananas or prunes. And so there's quite a bit of information there. Why did I self-publish it? Well, for so many reasons. The first is, as you know, because you've seen it, but your listeners do not yet, is that it's an O binding. So it lays flat on the counter. And it's so important to me that a book be usable, that when you've got your hands in something or you're juggling all these different things, you're not saying, where did the page go? And the book's flipped close. So I really wanted it to lay flat, makes it super user-friendly. And then I just wanted to get the book out into the world using the same values that I actually talk about in the book. So I wanted to support my local farmer and my local printer. I didn't want to be printing overseas. To me, there's nourishment in, handing the book to somebody and knowing that they're going to love it and saying, please, enjoy, and the thank you and that connection. I feel since the pandemic almost starved for. So it was really, really nice to produce the book. And it's been really lovely to be able to share it with people so personally. In my previous books, I remember someone made a comment, I think on Amazon, about, some ingredient that I used throughout the whole book that they didn't like, except the one little flaw was that it was an ingredient that wasn't anywhere in the book. And so someone said, you can't take this stuff so personally. And I totally disagree. Like, this work is all personal to me. It comes from my heart. So this self-published book really represents that in every way. And to be able to work with our mutual friend, Kurt, he's actually designed all 4 of my books. And I think they're brilliant in every touch that he's put into them that makes them so user-friendly that, the ingredient list is so easy to grasp. You can see just by looking at it, like, oh, this recipe is 2 paragraphs. It's easy. Yeah. So I wanted it to be exactly what I would want it to be if I were buying it. And so we self-published it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about the fermentation. You talked a little bit about it. I find it so interesting. I should have tried one of those, but I don't know. I chose the broccoli and the rice because they caught my attention first. But I think the next one, I'll do one of the fermentation ones. And actually, you have a couple of recipes to share with our listeners. that we can talk about. And one of them is about fermentation. And I just think it's really cool that you show how to do it. And so I'd just love to hear more about that.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that all the recipes in the book are brine ferments. So there are lots of ways to ferment foods that require other cultures.
Okay.
It could be a starter culture to make miso or to make kefir or whatever it might be, or kombucha. So I'm not doing that in this book. These are all brine ferments. And the beauty of that is you just put everything in the bottle, you cover it with salt water, and everything below that level of brine is going to ferment, and everything above it could rot. So it is a little bit of a science experiment. And I know when I first started making fermented foods, I thought, okay, I'm going to put this on the counter and intentionally let it rot in order to make it more nutritious. Like, this doesn't feel right to me. And so I really wanted to talk about what to look for, how to approach it. You don't need special equipment. A nice clean bottle is all it takes to do any of these ferments. And the recipe that I sent you that you were going to share with your listeners is a very simple vegetable ferment. It's got some sugar snap peas, watermelon radishes. I like to add jalapeno for that little bit of heat, although fermentation neutralizes a lot of the heat. But they could put green beans in it. And if you couldn't find watermelon radish, you can put regular radishes in it, or peppers, or
Carrot sticks,
or cauliflower, or broccoli stems. I mean, like, you can ferment almost anything. And it's a simple 3% brine solution. So a heaping teaspoon of salt in a cup of water is all it takes. Put everything in your jar. Now it's going to be in salted water. So what happens in salt water? Everything wants to float to the top. So you put all the little floaty pieces like your dill and your red pepper flakes or small things on the bottom. You wedge all those vegetables in there. You mix together and pour in your brine and screw on the lid and leave it on the counter for 3-5 days. I call it burping it. Each day you want to go and undo the lid and let the gases out. You seal it, leave it away from direct sunlight and heat. And then when it tastes delicious to you, it's done. And then you move it to the refrigerator. Now, the goal is to actually eat it. And I feel this way about fermented foods because they have really big taste, but I feel this way about everything. If there's something you've never had, just sitting down to a bottle of fermented sauerkraut or kimchi with a fork really might not be the best approach. But if you can mix it with something you already love and develop a taste slowly. So I try and tell people all the time, take your favorite salsa and chop up a teaspoon of kimchi or sauerkraut and mix it in with that salsa. And now you've added probiotics to the salsa, right? And it just tips the scale a little bit towards the taste of the ferment. And maybe you don't even notice it. So next time you put in 2 teaspoons, right? And before you know it, you might be like me, where you're sitting down to the bottle of kimchi with a fork. But that's not required for anybody.
Very interesting. I'm definitely going to try that one. And you have another recipe that I'd love for you to talk about, this pizza.
Yeah, I love this pizza. Every now and then when I'm making recipes, I'm creating because I have a craving. And in this case, it wasn't a craving as much as I really was just curious. And everyone makes a cauliflower pizza crust. And I was like, that's tasty. And I like that too. But I just wanted to do something different. So I started making a pizza crust using steamed sweet potato. And it makes an orange pizza crust. And I started making it with the steamed sweet potato and a gluten-free flour blend, and a little bit of apple cider vinegar, which activates the baking soda and makes it rise and get a little bit puffy. So I took them out of the oven the first time. I mean, that very first go, I was absolutely hooked. And I've tried them with all different flour blends because they're all really quite different. And if you're not gluten-free, you can use just regular all-purpose flour. And each one, sometimes the mixture, you put everything in your food processor and the sweet potatoes and the flour. And sometimes it's runny and sometimes it's pretty thick. And it just doesn't even matter. It comes out delicious every single time. And what I do is I just line my baking sheet with some parchment paper, and I scoop the batter out onto the parchment paper. And sometimes I'd make one big pizza, and sometimes I do little small ones. I drizzle a little olive oil over them and put parchment paper on the top so that I can just smooth it really, really easily. And you can feel, and then you just pull the parchment paper away and you have your perfect pizza crust. And the great thing about it is you could take that recipe. Well, first of all, you could take the pizza crust that you make and freeze it. Mm-hmm. Or you could make them small, almost like taco shells, and use them like as a little wrap for a burrito. And you can freeze those too, and just divide them with a little parchment paper and put them in a bag and put them in the freezer. Take them out and they defrost in just moments. And the recipe in the book, I use a pesto with some nice sauteed maitake mushrooms and some arugula, like so delicious. But you could take that same thing and sprinkle on a little cinnamon and some candied nuts and some dried figs or fresh figs, and drizzle a little balsamic vinegar or maple syrup and have a sweet version too. Like, it goes in so many directions and it's just so delicious and easy.
Oh, well, you have to try that one too. And I know you said with the watermelon radish and sugar snap peas, the fermented vegetables, you said they're foolproof is what one of the things you sold me on that. So
yeah, foolproof.
Thank you for letting me share those with the listeners in the show notes at soundbitesrd.com. As we're wrapping up, I want to know what your sort of takeaways or best tips for people who want to start eating and cooking a little bit more plant-based. And also, I know we can only get the book through you, so I want you to share your website and your social media handles.
Well, my website is my name, terrywalters.net, and my social media is Clean Food on Facebook and Terry Walters Cooks on Instagram. And the book is available at terrywalters.net and free shipping. Ooh. And my tips, so many tips. But I think my top tips would be, number one is just to be mindful of where you're at. Pay attention before you take any steps. Just look at what you're doing. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in to see a doctor or a naturopath and they said, well, what'd you eat yesterday? And I think, I'm not sure, because sometimes it's just so unconscious. And I have that disease where I pick on things and I just put them in my mouth all day long because I'm passing through the kitchen and I'm thinking about food all day long. It's not good. And so I think just look and see where you're at. And that might mean journaling for a few days to see, writing it down. And then when you write down and you step back and look at it, you can see, okay, these are the colors I can check the box on. These are the tastes I do well with. What prebiotics, probiotics am I getting, if any? And that will hopefully direct you to where to start and, filling in those missing links. For fermented foods, I often tell people, because I think it's so critical, if they changed nothing else in their diet, but added something fermented, which could be as simple as a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar with the mother in it, the nice, healthy, alive apple cider vinegar. That's a great place to start. And I don't recommend a big change because I think it doesn't matter how healthy the food is, or, if you're moving to something healthier, that's fantastic. But change is hard on the body. It's hard emotionally. It's hard on our moods. It's not always so easy to make a big change, nor is it sustainable.
Right.
So I really think taking it slow. And like I said, one recipe a week is a great way to do it. And so start with something fermented, focus on one recipe a week, focus on the foods that you're not getting, the tastes and colors that you're not getting, add something fermented. And if there's any way at all, share the journey with somebody else. It doesn't have to even be somebody in your immediate family or household, but if there's somebody else who's interested in kind of working towards the same goal that you can talk about it with, go for a walk, I think that makes it all the more nourishing.
Oh, I love that idea. And that's a great way too. If you are trying new ingredients and new flavors, that you could share that with a friend as well. Say, hey, maybe I won't use this whole, I was saying ume plum vinegar, but it's umi.
It is ume, or short
Umi.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, hey, I bought this. It's great. Do you want to try it? And if you like it, then you can buy it too. So that's a great idea to share that journey.
Yeah. And maybe it's, I made this recipe and I loved it, or I made this one, but when you make it, I think you should try it with this ingredient, right? Or everybody is different. And that means our tastes are going to be different too. And maybe it's, I'm going to make something once a week and you're going to come here for lunch.
There you go.
Right. And you're going to make something once a week and we're going to go there and have breakfast, or maybe we'll just meet in the middle and go for a walk and talk about like how it made me feel. And that's good too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how you mentioned too with your index. I hadn't noticed how long it was, but I really like that concept of going there first and seeing, what's in your refrigerator that needs to be used up and starting from there. All about the food waste reduction.
Yeah. And the index, if you're in a recipe and you stumble across something that you're not familiar with, you can go to the index and look it up there too and say, okay, here's the page where I'm going to learn about what kombu is, or apple cider vinegar, or whatever the ingredient might be.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me and for writing this beautiful book and sharing it with me. And another shout out to our mutual friend, Kurt. He's one of my very best friends. He's just a wonderful human being.
Agreed.
And happy that he introduced me to you. Just thank you again for everything. And for our listeners, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind and with nourishment in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag in Detroit Podcasts.